Joining me now is South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn, Assistant Democratic Leader and one of the national co-chairs of the Biden re-election campaign. Congressman Clyburn, it's nice to see you. I appreciate you making time to speak with us right now. I do want to ask you, in recent months, you told one of our colleagues that you're confident that black voters are going to turn out in force for President Biden. But on this most recent Sunday, you said that you're, quote, very concerned about black voters showing up for the president. What changed, sir?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Nothing changed. My concern is much more with black voters getting the right information, getting all of the information so that they will be informed voters. That's my concern. I believe very strongly that this president has done what is necessary to earn the support of African Americans all over this country. But I'm also concerned that when we report these results, they don't always tell the full story. And student loan debt relief is one of the best examples I can think of. The president attempted to reduce and eliminate the student loan debt in 5 different categories. He got sued in one category and was stopped from doing so. He pursued the other 4, which resulted in $132 billion in student loan debt relief for 3.4 million people. That never gets reported.
Yeah, and no doubt.
Only report the lawsuit.
I apologize for interrupting. No, you make a good point. And also, certainly, Republicans oppose the president every which way as it related to student loans, though. But as you speak about these concerns right now, what specifically can the president do? What does he need to do to ease your concerns?
More of what he's done in the last 2 big speeches. I think the speech up there after Valley Forge was a great speech. The speech at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston was even greater. He took the big picture offered by Valley Forge, by George Washington, and localized it to current conditions as demonstrated at the event that happened at Emmanuel Church. And so this is what I think needs to be done for the president to continue to forcefully speak out on these issues that are threatening the people of this country with their freedoms and with the democracy that we all hold dear. That, to me, demonstrates that the president is on track. And I really appreciated both those speeches. And all I can say is more, more, more.
Congressman Clyburn, do you wish the president had taken this tack sooner? Do you think he waited too long to do this?
No, I don't. You know, we do things when they need to be done. I do believe that if the president had done this before the Christmas holidays, it may have gotten washed away with all the reveille. Now that we are focused on a Congress that seemed not to be able to get out of its way, just today, the very first rule that the Republicans put forth in the new year, they failed. So the president is doing it at the right time, though it was a little frustrating to be in that waiting period. But I think we are exactly where we need to be.
Congressman, I want to ask you, some officials in Michigan, Democrats there, have complained that President Biden has been spending too much time in Pennsylvania in particular. We just learned that the president's going to be traveling to Michigan and Nevada, reported exclusively first by NBC News. He'll do that this month. Does the president need to step up his outreach in some of those other key battlegrounds where the election might be decided?
Well, you know, I don't know how to keep up with the percentages of the time that the president may be spending on one place or another, but I do believe that it's got to be everywhere. This is not a regional election. This is an election for 50 states and territories, plus the territories, and so we've got to be everywhere that we can possibly be, given the time constraints on being president of the United States, leader of the free world. He cannot be there as often as we would like, but as much as he can, we should do.
Of course, the president's time is the biggest asset he has during the course of a campaign. There has been recent reporting about former President Obama meeting with President Biden to discuss his campaign operation and specifically the need to better empower aides in his headquarters to make decisions. Are the president's struggles to this point a campaign issue, sir, or a candidate issue?
Well, I think that I met with the president around the same time the former president did, and there were others meeting with him as well. All of us are expressing to the president that which we think needs to be done. And so when I read the reports of what former President Obama said, it was nothing different from what I had said to him. So it looks as if all of us see the same things happening, and I think all of us agree on what needs to be done.
Sir, a couple other questions about recent headlines. We're learning more, of course, about the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's health challenges. He is, as you know, being treated for prostate cancer. Most importantly, his doctors say that his prognosis is excellent. But of course, this episode also raises serious questions about his judgment, not telling the White House about his hospitalization for days. Does this issue rise to the level where the secretary needs to step down or that someone else should serve as defense secretary in your view?
Absolutely not. Maybe he should have spoken earlier. He thought he was going in, as my understanding is, for a simple in and out procedure. And that happened, except that 4 or 5 days later, complications set in. Now, that changed the dynamics in a big way. Now, who was responsible at that point? I think the investigation that the White House is conducting will reveal what needs to be done, and I won't get out in front of that.
No doubt. Let me ask you two final questions. One, would you have advised Hunter Biden to appear at today's hearing? How big of a distraction, liability is he to the president's reelection bid?
Well, I think it is a distraction, but I don't think it's a liability. I think that all this is going to do is demonstrate what a good father Joe Biden is. We all, maybe not all, but I have children, and I'm concerned about them, and I want to be a good father to them. And I'm not going to let any office I hold get in the way of being a good father. And I think that's what Joe Biden is doing here, and I do believe that any public testimony will reveal that. In private, they come out and say what they want to say. They come out and paint what picture they want to paint.
And
what do they have to hide? Do it in public.
And that's been Hunter Biden's concern from the start here. Last quick question, if I can, for you. I just want to get your view on the status in terms of the risk of a government shutdown. How concerned should Americans be about a shutdown?
Well, I think they should be concerned about it, especially after today's vote. The fact of the matter is, the Speaker has reached an agreement with the Democratic leadership that he has about 10 or 12 people disagreeing with him. So if they do not give the votes that are necessary to pass this bill, they will shut the government down, and the American people will see that the Republican conference is once again doing what is necessary, not doing what is necessary to run the country.
Congressman Jim Clyburn, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for making time to speak with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.